So our last presentation for this session will be given by Sugat Tuladar, who joins us from Hanover Medical School and present on in vitro evaluation of decellularized pericardium for transcatheter aortic valve regeneration.
Yeah, thank you. Hi everyone. So I'm Sugat. I'm coming from Hanover Medical School. And today I would like to present results from this project where we are trying to develop a regenerative TAVI using decellularized pericardium. So we are all aware that current bioprosthetic heart valves that are based on glutaraldehyde-treated tissues, they have the problem that they degenerate within 5 to 10 years. And as a solution to this problem, in Hanover Medical School, we have been focusing on developing decellularized scaffold that would avoid the need of glutaraldehyde fixation and would offer regenerative prosthesis. And in this regard, so in Hanover Medical School, we have already developed a decellularized homograft. As you can see here, an example of a decellularized pulmonary homograft. And these homografts have shown excellent results in clinical applications, both in pulmonary as well as aortic settings. And it has been shown that these homografts have minimal explantation rate, and recently it has even been shown that these cell-free allogenic heart valves undergo recircularization in vivo and even grow along the patients. So with this background, we want, as a next step, to translate this into pericardial scaffold, because we know that the bioprosthetic heart valves are made with a pericardium. And in the last year, we have been able to successfully decellularize both bovine and porcine pericardium. Here you see an example of a decellularized bovine pericardium. And in the recent paper from us, we have been able to show that following decellularization, the histoarchitecture and mechanical properties of the scaffold remain well preserved. And here's an example. So we saw from histology that the collagen fibers and the gags are well preserved compared to the native tissue. And this was further confirmed through immunohistochemistry, where we saw that along with collagen 1, elastin, even components such as collagen 4 and laminin were well preserved. So these are the components of the vessel lamina, which would later play an important role for the regenerative process. And yeah, with this background, right now we are running a project that is funded by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, where we aim to develop regenerative TAVI. And we're using nitinol stents and decellularized pericardium to develop such prototypes. So this is our recent prototype. So here, this is a decellularized porcine pericardium. So I'll be presenting results from these prototypes. So these prototype, after development, we did in vitro assessment to do a detailed analysis of their performance. So the first tests were the hydrodynamic tests, and these were performed in the BTC pulse duplicator. Under the conditions and requirements set by the ISO. Depending on the stent size, the implantation diameter was 21 millimeters, and we tested them under 3 MAP conditions, so 80, 100, and 120 millimeters mercury. And 2 aortic analog models were used as required by the ISO. One was circular, and another was a circular with a calcification nodal to mimic the calcification. Here are the results. So a video showing the performance of the valve. As we can see, the valve is opening and closing properly. And pressure and flow measurements were taken during these hydrodynamic tests. Here we see normal aortic and ventricular pressure readings, as well as a proper flow measurements, so during the systole, and a very minimal regurgitation during the diastolic phase. Similar results were observed also for the group with the calcification nodal. So there was not so much difference with the aortic and the ventricular pressure. They were all normal. There was a slightly more regurgitation, which was evident in the parameters that were calculated. So first was the effective orifice area, which according to ISO for this 21 millimeter implantation size needs to be greater than 1.05, which was the case in all the conditions. And yeah, as we expect, so for the groups with the calcification, the effective orifice area was slightly less, which is as expected. But however, they always were greater than the required value. The pressure gradient to remain below 15 millimeters of mercury, and the regurgitation was always below 20%, which means that these valves prototype, they satisfy the minimum requirements set by the ISO. The next in vitro test that we did was with the particle image velocimetry. This was done with a setup with a vitro pulse duplicator as shown here. And the measurement was based on this 2D, 2C principle. That means we measured it in a two-dimensional plane, and only 2 out of the 3 velocity components were measured. So this is the simplest form of PIV measurements that we could do. Yeah, here we can see a top and the front view of the setup. So laser, and at 90 degrees we had a camera, and this camera captured such two-dimensional image. So there were sequence of these images captured, and then they were processed to measure the velocity vectors and the viscous shear stress. And these PIV measurements were taken at 6 time points of the cardiac cycle. Here we first see the results from the velocity field. Yeah, for this we also had a control valve, a commercial one, portico valve. Yeah, as we see that all the measurements, they sort of well-defined jet during the systolic phase, and the maximum velocity that was measured was 1.6 meters per second. That was during the peak systole for the decellularised group. And yeah, the advantage of this this method is that we could also then compare the flow pattern of the different models and evaluate their behaviors. And we also have the streamlines indicating the directions of the flow, as indicated by the arrows here. And these results show that there were no evident reverse flow, which indicated that there is no paravalvular leakage, and the design was quite good. Further, viscous shear stress were then calculated. Yeah, the highest value observed was, as expected, during the peak systole, and the maximum value that was calculated for all the model was 7 Pascal. And the significance of this is that with these shear stress values, we can predict if the flow conditions would lead to some unwanted events like the platelet activation or hemolysis. And this value that we measured was below the values reported in literature that would or might lead to these kind of events. So yeah, in conclusion, so in this phase of the project, we were able to develop TAVI prototypes manufactured from decellularized pericardium that showed optimal performance in vitro. The hydrodynamic tests demonstrated that these valves, they have optimal values for the different parameters, so the effective orifice area, pressure drop, and regurgitation as per the ISO requirements. PIV analysis have showed that the valve design is safe in terms of platelet activation or hemolysis. And as a next step, so we have also planned in vivo experiments in large animal model where we will further investigate the response of this scaffold. Yeah. And at the end, I would like to thank our collaborators from Rostock, so the people from the group of Professor Smits and Gravro who did these PIV measurements. And at the end, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Do we have any questions? Sure, go ahead.
Hello, great presentation. I just wanted to ask you, what was the decellularization protocol and how was it treated, and do you think this might influence, obviously, the properties of the material? Thank you.
Yeah, so the results presented here, so this was based, the decellularization was based on STS and Triton X. So we followed the same protocol that was used for this homograph. And like I said, we have already a recent paper where we compared with the histology, their histoarchitecture, as well as the mechanical properties. So like there was not significant change compared to the native pericardium. And the main objective then was to see if the hydrodynamics and the design would work. Yeah.